Okay, it's 5 o'clock. So I'm happy to welcome everybody to our NEU next climate change Zoom. Really pleased to see all of you here, and I believe there may be some joining us later as more people have registered. So for our meeting today, our theme of the meeting is education fit for the climate crisis, what we need from the DFE and what we can do for ourselves. We've got a really exciting lineup of speakers today. The first one is, in a minute, is going to be Mary Boosted, our Joint General Secretary of the NEU, who wanted to be part of this meeting, but is away, so was unable to join us in person, but is going to join us via a recorded video link. We've also got Jennifer Ulrich from Education International. We've got Richard Suter from the Schools Climate Education South Yorkshire. We have Paul Turner from the Ministry of Eco-Education and Nick Moss, Head Teacher of Minchinhampton Academy. Graham Frost, who's on the NAHT Executive and is a primary head teacher. Phoebe Hanson from Teach for the Future, and Dr. Lorraine Whitmarsh, an environmental psychologist from the University of Bath. I'll give you a more detailed introduction to our speakers when it's their turn to speak. So we're asking people if they can speak for 5 minutes. If you can try and keep it to 5 minutes each, that would be great, because we're hoping we might have time for some questions and answers at the end. Just to say before I hand over to our first recorded speaker, what a great day to hold our meeting, one day after the so-called political impartiality guidelines are published by the government's website. I've just been enjoying my afternoon on my half term, reading those in detail before the meeting, and lots of food for thought and possibly anger there. And also one day before Storm Eunice, which I think is going to remind a few people of what it all is that we're up against. But it's great to see all of you here today who care about the same thing that we do, an education fit for the climate crisis. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mary Boosted. Can we have her film up now, please? Thank you.
November 2021, Kevin attended COP26 in Glasgow. He met many young activists who inspired him with their ideas, their energy, and its inclusion in the curriculum, and encourage education staff at grassroots levels to share ideas to do that. We are fortunate in DENEU to see the crisis is also helping us to forge links with other organisations and other education unions. At the COE, the DFE produced its draft climate strategy. Whilst there were steps forward, overall this fell far short of what the education unions had asked for. It's good, however, that the DFE is engaging with consultation between now and April about how to include the climate emergency in the curriculum. One big concern that we is about how they're trying to interpret what is partisan, as students should be able to do this in the positions. Some of the welcome but limited action being taken is a result of the extraordinary actions by school students telling their elders to wake up. The government really must not attempt to gag the student protest movement or the support for it amongst teachers and other education staff. There should be no attempt to freeze debate on the question in schools and colleges by labelling any ideas not limited to the policies determined by the government of the day partisan. Unless significantly amended in the consultation, the references to being partisan will not address the justified anxiety felt by so many young people about the future offers for them. To confront the climate crisis and be part of the solution to it, now our education system must respond adequately and appropriately to two things. Firstly, everyone in schools, colleges, and the wider education and community needs to both understand the nature and scale of the crisis and be able to play the fullest possible part in the transition we need to a sustainable society. Secondly, the anxiety that leads 77% of young people globally to fear for their future, 54% to believe that humanity is doomed, and 38% to be actively planning not to have children. This must be turned into positive action and engagement in that transition. The steps being planned by the DfE go part of the way, but in mid-January, the NEU, along with the NAHT, NASCWT, UCU, Unison, the GMB, NUS, SOS UK, Thoughtbox, and The Edge, wrote to Nadim Zahawi. I'll just focus briefly on a couple of key points from this joint response. In addition to our major concern already highlighted that there should be no attempt to freeze debate. So we said to Nadim Zahawi, we need to cover the entire curriculum. This matters because the crisis and the transition are something we all need to understand and we play a part in. Article 12 of the Paris Agreement mandates governments to educate and mobilise the whole of society to deal with this crisis. It's the biggest social challenge of our time and cannot be left to people primarily studying STEM subjects and geography. This is not simply a skills agenda for the green sector of the economy, though that is vital. It's about making the whole of our society green. Nor can this be covered simply by a knowledge-rich form of learning. We also need to be much more expansive in our understanding of what constitutes green skills, including, for example, caring roles and teaching, alongside a proper appreciation of these roles in the economy. There is also no acknowledgement of the gender inequality in STEM subjects or how this might be addressed. We need to decarbonise school and college buildings and develop green travel plans with a greater sense of urgency. With the job done by 2020-30, that would in itself send a message to the wider community that we mean business and we're not looking around. This also needs adequate resourcing with proper funding commitments, particularly for schools in areas of deprivation. One of the most positive aspects of the DfE plan, that teaching resources should be available for all teachers in all subjects from 2023, that's really welcome. But these resources need to be integrated into the core curriculum for every subject and built into the exam syllabus, not left as an optional extra. We are also clear that green training for teachers must also be incorporated into existing training rather than being an add-on or an optional qualification. We look forward to working with the DfE on everything positive that they put forward, whilst taking further initiatives to push the green agenda further, fill in the gaps, and urge greater efforts throughout the system from top to bottom. Thanks for listening.
Thank you to Mary for taking the time to record that message, and apologies to anyone that had trouble hearing that. I think it worked for some people some of the time, but not the whole message. So somebody's going to post the link to that in the chat so that you can get a chance to listen to it later if you'd like to. The main gist of it being, of course, that we, of course, want to work with the DfE on the steps that they're taking following COP26, but with the emphasis being we believe these are partial steps and it needs a lot more. And that's part of the reason we're holding meetings like this one today. Now, we hopefully are going to hear a little bit of perspective now from some other countries, because we're going to go over to our second speaker, Jennifer Ulrich from Education International. This is Education International is a global Federation of Education Unions, which has 383 member organisations, which represents over 32 million educators across 178 countries. Jennifer has led Education International's policy, advocacy and research work related to climate education and climate justice. So big welcome to you, Jennifer, and thank you for coming to speak today.
Hi, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well. Yes, good, fantastic. So thanks so much for inviting me today. It's really a pleasure to be on this Zoom. As you've said, so EI is a global union federation, which NEU is a member of, and we aim to bring the voice of teachers into international education policy decision-making, and also to promote international solidarity and support and learning amongst education unions globally. So when we had our World Congress in 2019, we had a mandate to step up our climate work, and last year we launched the Teach for the Planet campaign, you can see behind me. So the campaign calls on all governments to provide quality climate change education for all, and to do that we wanted them to enact a kind of broad roadmap which is laid out in a teacher's manifesto on the topic. In November last year, EI made teachers' voices heard when we were at COP26, and we joined NEU leadership as well, and NEU members marching for climate justice on the streets of Glasgow in the rain. While we were there, what really stood out was the dynamism of climate activists, and really the potential strength of our movement when teachers join together with these activists and with students and stand together, all demanding climate education. And it's really exciting to see this momentum kind of continuing, and students, activists and teachers working together, and events like this kind of continuing that. Whilst we were in COP, we did attend the first ever summit of Education and Environment Ministers. And there we were really pleased to see that the UK was emphasising its commitment to climate education. Recent UNESCO research shows that actually only 53% of national curriculum frameworks had any explicit mention of climate education or climate change, at all. So the UK's commitment is definitely a step in the right direction. However, the draft strategy certainly has a long way to go before it really lives up to the principles that have been defined by teachers globally in the EI manifesto on quality climate change education for all. I'm going to mention a couple of ways that we've seen gaps and how they could be filled, drawing on some of the international evidence. So just one example, the draft strategy mentions further training on for science, geography and citizenship teachers, which is great, but EI's manifesto emphasises that all teachers really need to be supported by quality initial and in-service training on climate, so that learning on climate can be embedded holistically across grades and across subjects, and using a whole school approach. Unfortunately, this is not the norm at the moment globally. Another survey we conducted in collaboration with UNESCO found that although 95% of teachers were motivated to teach climate education, only 55% reported that they had ever received any training on it, and less than 40% were confident teaching it. But there are some countries that are making efforts to really change this. So, for example, Zimbabwe is starting to mainstream climate change education into teacher education programs, and there's a new national strategy calling for all teacher training colleges to cover climate issues. We need other countries to follow suit. We also have to make sure that when we're preparing teachers to embed climate education across the curriculum, this is done so we are moving towards quality climate education with a just transition. So teachers need to be prepared, but we cannot do this by increasing already overflowing workloads of teachers. Turning to what Mary was talking about, the guidance that we've seen come out from the UK, and the strategy warning about being partisan when it comes to climate solutions and climate action. EI's manifesto is actually very clear that climate education must have a civic action component. We know that climate education cannot just be about the science; it also needs to have an action component, and we need to be teaching students to have critical minds, to stand up for social justice, and to have teachers empowering students to take action in their local communities and to hold their governments accountable when they're not keeping their climate promises made at events like COP26. So teachers, they can't be afraid to teach about the climate. They must be trusted to be politically impartial, and their professional autonomy really needs to be expected. We also want to see kind of continuous consultation with teachers and their unions. The UK strategy really spells out a desire to be a world-leading education sector in sustainability and climate change by 2030. This is really admirable, but from EI's perspective, to be a global leader, we'd really need to see some more ambition. So, for example, in Italy, the ministry introduced compulsory climate change education in all schools for at least 1 hour a week, and aimed to put the environment and society at the core of everything that was learnt in schools. We'd also want to see more interministerial collaboration. So EI's research showed that the UK also has some way to go when education is recognised within climate policies. So our analysis looked at nationally determined contributions of countries that had submitted them, and found that out of 95 countries analysed, the UK scored 62. In terms of climate education in their national climate action plans. So there's more to be done. So just want to end by saying, so through the Teach for the Planet campaign, we've really seen education unions across all regions mobilising, working together and stepping up their climate advocacy. It's been really great to see the joint advocacy efforts between unions in the UK and working with other civil society actors and students. In this year, as we move towards COP27, we'll be continuing the campaign and calling on governments to implement the commitments made last year at COP26. We're really hopeful for even stronger commitments in Egypt. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was really exciting work going on there, and very inspiring, very closely aligned with all the things that we've been discussing over the last few months. So thanks for that. We're going to go now from the sort of more global perspective to the sort of local authority perspective. So our next speaker is Richard Suter, who is a retired primary school teacher and former president of the NUT in Sheffield. And he's an activist with Sheffield Friends of the Earth and Sheffield Against Fracking. But he is currently now coordinator of Schools Climate Education South Yorkshire, which is an organisation working with local authorities in South Yorkshire on a climate emergency education. So welcome, Richard, and we're excited to hear from you. Thank you. You just need to unmute, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, my apologies. Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. But can I first just draw your attention to the link that I put in the chat earlier to our conference that's coming up on the 1st, 2nd and 3rd of March. It's the second conference that we're holding, virtual online conference for children and teachers. It's going to cover the sessions are going to cover a wide variety of topics, and also the topics are available for a variety of age groups as well. Working with local authorities on climate emergency is perhaps not exactly what is happening. We have in South Yorkshire a South Yorkshire mayoral combined authority, and we thought it might be a good idea if the 4 authorities actually worked together on climate education. But if we just draw a little example of how our authorities work together, they don't even agree on what time or what dates they should have the half-term holidays. So 2 authorities have 1 week where they have the half-term holiday. Another 2 authorities have their holidays on another week. So that's Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham and Sheffield. SCESI came together to, you could call it a case study if you like, certainly not a silver bullet. Others working with local authorities may fare better, I hope they do. But it was our allies coming together in education, teaching unions, the Development Education Centre in South Yorkshire, and climate activists like myself and unionists like myself as well came together to form SCESI. We felt that there was a need being expressed by the school students and through the demands of Teach the Future. And so we've evolved to have 2 sort of primary aims: to raise awareness in schools about the climate emergency and the nature emergencies, pushing the whole idea of learning for a sustainable future, but also not just about learning about schools themselves and people working in schools, taking action to reduce their impact and to preserve and enhance nature. The principal vehicle we use for this is this annual conference, preferably backed by the local authorities. And we hope we're trying to establish through this a network where schools can share and collaborate with each other. One of the things that we established was a website. And when you visit our website, you'll see on it a lot of resources. I think that's what a lot of teachers need. Teachers need resources. They need to be signposted to resources. It's not an exhaustive resource bank, and it certainly needs updating, but it's a really good place for teachers to go. As our conference from last year, everything available on the conference last year and upcoming this year are available, and they're all free. And the conference is free as well, which I think is an important aspect for schools in these difficult times. There was an opportunity came up when there was a draft Sheffield education strategy for 2030. I thought, oh, this looks interesting. So I read through it, and there was no mention of the climate emergency or the nature emergency in this strategy. And I think this underlines the point that I'm sure it is not just the case in Sheffield, but across the board, there isn't this recognition. As Jennifer said, when you look at policies and documents, reference to education and climate is just not there. And so there was a wonderful consultation period in the middle of a pandemic over the Christmas holidays for 1 month in which you could consult. But luckily I managed to force my way onto the consultation and actually got a listening ear from the person heading up that, which was the Chief Executive Officer for Learn Sheffield, a kind of outsourcing of education things from Sheffield City Council. So from zero, we've now got a climate emergency education project off the ground. And it's a strategic plan to be developed with partners, which includes ourselves, the council, so Development Education Centre for South Yorkshire, supporting schools to address the climate and ecological emergencies. Funding £24,000. So some people, when they say that, say, "Oh, that sounds wonderful," but it's not really. It's not even a full-time teacher in the first year. So this includes the development of CPD for teachers and curriculum resource development at all stages, sort of looking at preparing students for jobs and considering the carbon economy and also the carbon footprint of schools. It's got a strategic intent is to ensure that Sheffield teachers have the subject knowledge and curriculum resources to prepare all Sheffield children and young people to be successful global citizens, prepare the students for jobs in the low carbon economy, and support and challenge all schools to improve their carbon footprints, to set a cohesive collective carbon footprint target for the sector. So there's a delivery of the programme that's going to include an offer of CPD for teachers, curriculum resource for all disciplines at all key stages and for all sectors, and the annual conference, which is already being delivered by us. Also, the second part of that is to look at targeted offers such as teaching, climate and ecological emergency inside and outside the classroom, skills and careers for low carbon economy and improving the carbon footprint of each setting, and a project team with cross-sector teaching and subject expertise. Also, we hope that this will increase subject knowledge and confidence, increase the curriculum profile across all sectors and disciplines, and it will also, we hope there'll be clear pathways into careers in the low carbon economy, leading to raised employment. So that's really the stage it's at. We're now at the planning stage. Part of that planning stage includes the conference, training, which includes looking at things like carbon literacy. Learn Sheffield and Development Education Centre will be looking at that. And also, as Jennifer pointed out, whole school approaches. We're looking at where schools can adopt a whole school approach, for instance, looking at programmes like Let's Go Zero, eco schools and so on, to see whether there's a way of delivering it through them, and also the development of resources for all the stages. I think one of the key things that's come to me through all of this is about collaboration and how important it is, and how schools are not set up to collaborate, they're set to compete with one another. And we want to sort of push this whole thing about collaboration. And after all, if we're saying that we require of all leaders that they collaborate to address the climate emergency and ecological emergencies, it's SCESI we believe that we should rise to that challenge as well, and encourage as much collaboration as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And while you were talking, I did have a quick look at your website, and the resources section looks really good because it's brought together loads of the things that are kind of currently scattered on lots of different people's websites or in different places. It looks quite inspiring. So thanks very much for all the work you're doing and for sharing that with us. We're now going to welcome two speakers who are presenting together, a double act. We have Paul Turner from the Ministry of Eco-Education and Nick Moss, who's head teacher of Minchinhampton Academy, and they're talking about cross-school projects, I think, if I've got this right. The Ministry of Eco-Education is a collaboration of teachers working together to place sustainability at the heart of education, but Nick and Paul are going to tell us more. So welcome to you two. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you so much for allowing us to have this chance to speak to everyone. It is an incredibly exciting talk, kind of event, discussion, room, and looking down at the list of attendees, there's lots of familiar faces and actually teachers who are part of this project. So this project is funded by the Green Britain Foundation, which is backed by Dale Vince, who's involved in a whole variety of projects like the Good Law Project, which is doing some great things, holding the government to account around PPE and all sorts of other things. He was also one of the funders of Seaspiracy. So he has a real passion around this, and he has committed in the long term to helping grassroots initiatives which embed climate and nature education now. And this project is very much about understanding the urgency and doing as much as we possibly can right now, not waiting for governments to change policies in the long term. This is about using all of the opportunities and the agency that we have ourselves, and making the most of that to have the biggest impact as soon as possible. So there's a bit of a story to this project. It started with Nick and his school near Stroud, mentioned Hanson Academy, and it was the seeds of a really good idea that he and his staff had, that we came in and helped develop. And what we've created is a holistic curriculum that brings together all of the resources that people on this call have already talked about. So all of those great projects like Let's Go Zero and Eco Schools, what we've done is embedded them in the curriculum and reframed the national curriculum. So this is something that schools are doing right now, and it's a chance for them to embed this without having to wait for governments. So this is sort of grassroots, bottom up. It's making the change happen right now. And it is happening in, at the moment, 15 schools across the country, and it's growing and growing and growing. So we're enlisting schools at the moment to have 100 by September, for September 2022. We also have started development of a key stage 3 element. So at the moment, we've just been working with primary schools, and we've found that to be really successful. We have been working with some really innovative educators, lots of them on this call, people like Merrill up near Durham up north. We've also got a lady called Hannah Tomling, who's another inspiring early years teacher. And what we're doing is bringing those people together, fostering their enthusiasm, using our kind of knowledge resource networks to help facilitate change now. And so what we've done is essentially tried to do the hard work, the legwork for teachers. So, Jennifer was saying these teachers don't have the time resource at the moment. We've done that for them. And at the very least, teachers can sort of lift these resources off. And what it does is it teaches climate and nature emergency in every lesson for every pupil. So as well as achieving what the national curriculum sets out, we have reframed that around this environmental lens. So there's questions that explore things like, what really is renewable? Should we all go vegan? Do we need to insulate our homes? These are sort of everyday questions that children engage with, young people engage with through the media, through all kinds of other platforms on a daily basis. And it's our job as teachers to help them navigate those discussions, navigate their understanding of those. And we can do that right now. So I'm going to hand over to Nick, who's just going to talk about the impact within his own school. And what I would also say before I hand over is we need all of you on this call to sign up. So I've dropped the link in the chat to be able to sign up to this, and also a clip. Dale was quite fortunate to be interviewed on Sky News recently about the Ministry of Eco Education platform as well. So Nick.
Hello. Please recognise I'm hopelessly out of my depth. I'm just a humble head teacher sitting here. And we approached Dale Vince at Ecotricity. Paul came on board, and we've suddenly found ourselves in the midst of this wonderful thing, feeling a little small and humble, but it's been an amazing journey. I think, our starting point, and I think I'm going to try and stay very kind of primary school head orientated and try and be realistic about what we were trying to achieve. Because I think people have some natural barriers in their minds as to whether they can take this kind of thing on board, and I think those barriers are not necessary. The first point I'd like to make, I think, is that we feel it's really important for the curriculum to empower our children. I got a very end of a long-term sore throat. To speak their truth. To make them feel like they can make a difference to the world. These are cliches, but I think this last term, if nothing else, has proved to me just how fragile the mental health of our children is right now. And of course, we've had 2 years of that anxiety from COVID rolling around in their heads. But you know what? Before that and now, we've also got the anxiety of the climate crisis. And I really don't think we can afford to underestimate what they're having to process in their young heads. And I don't think, we cannot shy away from the need to empower them, to give them a chance to feel like they can solve problems, they can speak for themselves, they can make a difference. We do something called Philosophy for Children at school, and we're always inspired by just how much the children are capable of divergent thinking, of coming up with real purposeful solutions. I think it's a real mistake to underestimate children. And I think this is one of those opportunities with an eco curriculum. We've really got to step up to the mark and give them the means to make a difference to their world. So that's the first thing. It's a plea for children to be taken seriously, and certainly their mental health at this point in time to be taken seriously. The other side of it is we very much, this is from a learning side, just some educators. That is our primary role. You know, some schools might be sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, we've got so much on our plate. How on earth do we find the time to do the, you know, something comes along and it's, oh, we could do that in school. And you're like, oh, another thing. I compare our curriculum to how it was 30 years ago. It's ridiculously packed out. So it's a challenge. And I think, but I think we wanted, I think we've discovered a way here with Paul of actually delivering our curriculum in a more meaningful, a more purposeful and a more focused way than perhaps we had been in the past. It's not extra work, as Paul says. This eco curriculum is laced through all the subjects in school, and it's not something that's difficult to do. And the other side of it is that it and to use Deborah Kidd's made up word, it allows for a real botheredness to be there in the curriculum. We want the children to be bothered, to be concerned about what they're learning. Knowledge is not powerful unless it's something that has some kind of moral attachment that creates that level of concern. And if I'm being mercenary about it, what better than the climate crisis to harness your learning to create some really good learning? You know, it's that sounds a bit optimistic when we're dealing with a climate crisis, but it's actually really, really good for learning. So let's not forget that fact and see it as something encouraging for teachers. And I think, yeah, it's manageable. I talked about the word agency. I think it's been an extraordinary journey for my staff to work alongside Paul to generate this curriculum. That's very empowering for them. But the way we are teaching it and the way we've planned it is so it gives real agency to those children as well. It is a bottom-up curriculum. It's very empowering. And because Paul has created this website and we've got the backings of Dale and of Ecotricity, you know, all those resources are up there. And what we really want now, and as Richard was saying earlier on, that the challenge here is to get schools cooperating, working together, and this website is like the if you like the epicenter of that cooperation. That's where we want it to happen. So yeah, look, it's brilliant. I mean, I could go on talking a long time. My year 5, 6s are doing some extraordinary topic at the moment about sustainable clothing, all inspired by the work we've done with Paul. And it's the energy in the building is extraordinary. So yes, take it from me. It works, and it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I just wanted to jump in 2 seconds and say that when schools sign up, they get access to a whole variety of resources. Part of that are these teaching materials where we've weaved together all of these resources from more than 160 different charities into a kind of cohesive environmental curriculum. But also we've wrapped together all of the training for staff. We've also kind of embedded other elements. So we're trying to kind of do the job that we think the government should be doing. We're doing it right now, and we're doing it from the bottom up. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul and Nick. Again, very inspiring. And I think you might well have some more schools signing up to your network at the end of this call. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat, people wanting to kind of carry on connecting after this Zoom happens. I'm assuming the staff in the background are seeing that being posted on the chat, and maybe we can come up with some system after this meeting where we can get people in contact with each other for a sort of ongoing dialogue on all this, because it's really useful, all these groups collaborating together, I think. So thank you, Nick and Paul. Our next speaker is Graham. Graham Frost is a member of the NAHT National Executive and Cumbria Branch Secretary, and he's been a primary head teacher for 20 years, is currently head teacher of Robert Ferguson Primary School in Carlisle, and that's the school that hosted the Cumbria Youth Climate Summit in April 2019. Following this, Graham proposed a motion which led to NAHT committing to support environmental education and student activism. And he worked in partnership with Global Action Plan to organise and deliver an online National Youth Climate Summit. Very big welcome, Graham. And he's going to be talking, I think, about more that schools can do to take action on climate. So thanks, Graham, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Just want to say, really enjoyed listening to Nick, kindred spirit there, talking about empowerment and agency of students. And I really feel so passionately that that we need to take young people seriously. And Nick has said a lot of things that I was going to say, so that's great because it means I can talk about other things. But one of the things I would say there is that, I mean, when we did a project early on in our expansion of our environmental education at Robert Ferguson Primary School, shortly afterwards, I had comments from children who had been really inspired and motivated during the course of the project, but at the end of it, were feeling disillusioned because they were feeling, they really thought more was going to be done as a reaction to the really fantastic and powerful work that they were doing to put climate on the agenda for the local council. Since then, we've had local councils declaring climate emergencies, and even now they're still frustrated because they're saying, well, that's great, but where are you going with this? And then when we look at so much talk about should there be more environmental education in the curriculum, and it feels a little bit like we've taken a school trip on a boat, and the boat's taking in water, and the children are pointing to these various points at which the water is entering and saying, should I plug this? And should I plug this? And we say, no, leave that to the grown-ups. We've got a handle on this. And of course we haven't got a handle on this, and we need to be empowering, as Nick was saying, we need to be empowering, we need to be engaging and helping them to feel that they can be part of the solution to the mess that we've got the planet in. So talking about the practical things that we've done, it's already mentioned that we've organised events to try and really put environment on the agenda for local councils, and we do feel that has had some considerable purchase from the feedback we've had. So I'd be very happy to share a little bit more about that. If anyone wants to contact me afterwards, if you're interested in organising an event to try and engage your local government, local council to really engage with the issues. But the point there, though, was the exasperation on the young people gathered from 30 schools in an auditorium when the local councillor's response was, well, I'm changing the shampoo I'm using, I'm changing the way I shop. And what we're looking for from local business leaders and local leaders in the community and government sector is for sector-wide shift. We're starting to see it, but young people want to see much more. But how do we do that when we've got a government that are saying to us that they're basically politicizing something which is a scientific issue? They're politicizing or telling us that we're potentially politicizing it when we talk about it. And of course we're not, because what we're doing is we're presenting absolutely convincing fact from the global scientific community. And of course young people are saying, what can we do? Well, in our school, what we've been doing is encouraging our young people to get busy with writing, whether that's writing emails or writing letters, and to write to the people they want to persuade, and putting across their views based on their learning. So they have been doing that, and they've written to, for example, local supermarkets, and had very positive responses back from supermarkets where they've raised issue with palm oil, where they've raised issue with packaging. They've also just influenced local businesses by, for example, going on to a local sandwich shop and saying, can you change to a renewable packaging for your sandwiches, which they did. And the children took away some of the paper bags and decorated them with messages about the climate. So people were taking their sandwiches away with messages about the climate and trying to get it out into the community that way. But how do we do all of this when we've got a government that keep trying to muck things up? Well, we can quote them back, the things that they tell us about British values, these peculiar things that we know aren't just particularly British, but freedom of speech, democracy. We should be using those. And like Nick was saying, we can weave into the curriculum opportunities for children to write or to communicate or to express their learning about the climate and about the concerns about the climate. And in so doing, they feel they have an agency and feel they're doing something about the thing that they're concerned about. And it is absolutely essential that we allow for that. But then we're also doing things at a local level in terms of rewilding the school environment, in terms of growing vegetables and then using those in the school kitchen, and dramatically increasing the fauna and flora by attracting creatures and animals and things into the environment by diversifying the plants that we have. So there's so many things that we can do. Latching onto, I know at the beginning, Mary referenced the fact there's so much in geography and science, but it shouldn't be just restricted to those areas. However, certainly in primary, we're able to use the reference to climate as a starting point, as a launching platform into other parts of the curriculum, making sure they know about biodiversity and habitats, and so they know about fossil fuel use and how that is a problem. So there's a tremendous amount we can do already without having to change the curriculum. It's already fully crowded, but like Nick was saying, we tend to, through philosophy for children and other things, have these golden threads that run through the curriculum. I know there's particular challenges in secondary. How do you do that? But you can do. Our local secondary school here, some students from the Eco Council went to the staff meeting and convinced them to do just that, to have all subjects look at how they can teach children to engage in the issue of climate and biodiversity through their subjects. So plenty we can be doing, and hopefully that's given a few suggestions that might be of use to others. I'm happy to discuss any things that I've said after this seminar. Thanks for having me.
Very useful. Thanks very much, Graham. We're hearing from people repeatedly saying we basically need to take it into our own hands and get on and do it, which is great. And this call is full of people that are doing that, not least our next speaker. As Graham said, we must take young people seriously, and a Zoom like this wouldn't be complete without a young person represented here. So we've got somebody who has a proven track record of getting on and doing it, and that's Phoebe Hanson from Teach the Future. She's a young climate activist. In 2020, she coordinated Mock COP26, a virtual youth version of COP26. And in 2021, she co-convened a ministerial event at COP26 for education and environment ministers, facilitating pledges from 23 countries. She's currently volunteering with Teach the Future, a brilliant UK-based campaign for climate education. Welcome, Phoebe. Thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, no worries. It's lovely to meet you all. I'm Phoebe. I'm a youth organiser, particularly focusing on climate change and its impact on young people, but also on climate education. My mum's a teacher. My mum's a member of the NEU, actually. So it's always been something that's really, really important to me. Education and learning is something that's really critical, I think, to how we approach climate change, particularly when we go forward to talk about a green industrial revolution, or talk about greening our workforce, or talking about transforming the way that we see our life and the way that we go about industry. We need to make sure that our future workforce are equipped with the knowledge and the skills to be able to actually do that and put that into practice instead of just saying it and doing the rhetoric of that. So this is going to be a slightly different input, because I'm here doing a bit of an intro to a session that we'd love to be able to offer all of you on this call, though I would love to chat through the DFE climate sustainability strategy for anybody who would be willing to listen to my ramblings on that, because I have many thoughts. Nobody is willing to hear me talk about them. So if anybody would like to hear that, I'd be more than willing to. But I work for an amazing organisation called Mock COP. which transitioned from Mock COP26, which was that youth climate conference that we did in 2020. It was absolutely incredible. It engaged over 800 young people from over 140 different countries. And we built a platform off the basis of that, particularly focusing on climate education, because that was something that the young people in that conference really, really cared about, because it affects all of our lives directly and in the recent past. And we have that platform now that we do work on an international level, but also on a national level. That brings me into Teach the Future, which is an amazing UK-based climate education campaign that focuses on the like school building-y, like supply chain, like really nitty-gritty physical stuff that the DFE strategy focuses on. But it also focuses on climate education and climate like curriculum change as a key part of that. Because I didn't do separate science or geography in school. I was very much a like anti-STEM humanities person. And that meant that I got very little climate education in school. I think my climate education was a page in a textbook that I'm fairly sure I had to teach to myself, because my schools weren't very well funded and my school teachers were off on maternity leave for a lot of my science education. For me, climate was not something that I was able to have a discussion about. It wasn't something that I was able to talk to somebody about, somebody that had that information and knowledge to facilitate a conversation. I wasn't able to talk about my concerns. I wasn't able to talk about how scared I was on a daily basis, because there was no platform for that. There was no room for that to happen. And there was no education on how to transform like those terrifying headlines, pictures that you see in the news that looks like an apocalypse happening outside of your window or in another country on the other side of the world. It's just coming to you and there's nothing that you can do about it. There was no education for me to be able to compartmentalize that or understand what on earth was going on. What we were hearing from teachers when it came to that knowledge side of things is that it wasn't just the curriculum, like not having climate in the curriculum, that was stopping them from being able to teach students about climate change. But it was also, I think, as Jennifer was talking about earlier, it was their lack of confidence teaching about such a huge topic, because climate change, it feels so huge. As I was talking about, as a young person, it feels like an apocalypse. It feels massive. And because climate change feels so huge, it feels like there's no way that you could possibly understand it enough to be able to teach it and do it justice, teach it effectively, and to be able to facilitate conversations and rooms and discussion points around that. But I think the issue with that is, as I was saying, young people, that's how we feel too. We feel powerless, partially because we don't have the knowledge to understand the issue, and partially because we feel like we could never do anything about it. We don't have the vote. When I was younger, I didn't have much control over what my diet is. I couldn't go vegan or vegetarian. Not that that's necessarily the best way to tackle the climate crisis. I didn't have much control over what I was consuming, because that was dictated to me. I was a child. I didn't have much power over what I was spending my money on, because I didn't really have any money. You feel very powerless, I think, as a child, as a young person. So we wanted to do something about it. We wanted to make sure that young people were able to get the education that we wanted, but also that teachers were able to get the education that they needed, to make sure that they had the teacher training that, to be fair, the DFE should be providing, and I think they're on their way to providing, but quite slowly. So we started a campaign called Teach the Teacher, where students like myself who've become really engaged in this topic go into their own classrooms and teach their teachers about climate change. So about the science, the nitty-gritty stuff, but also about its impact and about climate policy making, like what COP is and what the UNFCCC is, and about its intersections with other social issues, and then how we want to be taught about it, how we as the students, as the young people in the classroom, want to be taught about climate change, what conversations we want to have, and what would make us feel more secure and like leaders in this space, and like we can do something going forward as the future generation in this space. I think in all, with the Teach the Teacher campaign, and this number is probably a little bit bigger now because sessions are still ongoing. We've got an amazing session in Canada happening tomorrow that I'm really lucky to be able to be participating in. We've had sessions in over 45 schools from over 20 countries, which is absolutely amazing. You guys on this call are already so engaged in this topic, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But there are so many ways, I think, that teachers can benefit from hearing directly from young people about climate change and about how we feel about it and about what elements of climate change are most important to us. When I've had teachers actually teach me about climate change, it's mostly been on the science, it's mostly been on the nitty-gritty stuff. As much as that is very important to me, and I really need to understand that, what is more important to me is how climate change is going to affect my life, how climate change intersects with human rights, how it intersects with things like racism and colonialism that have really been hitting the news recently. That's what's important to me as a young person, and that's what I'd really like to be taught about. And that's what we talk about in the teacher-teacher sessions. We talk about how teachers can facilitate those conversations in the classroom from a young person, from a student's perspective. So hopefully we'll be able to facilitate a session for this group next term on that kind of basis, on the teacher-to-teacher basis, as an opportunity to hear from students about how we'd like to be taught about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phoebe. It's really good to hear from you and to make sure that, you know, what we're arguing for mirrors what young people are asking for. And yeah, it's really, really good to have your voice represented here. Thanks for all the work that you're doing that inspires us as well. I've just put something in the chat asking people for permission. I hope this is okay. We're going to slightly overrun by 10 minutes because I haven't wanted to cut any of our speakers short because they're all really important to listen to and didn't want to sort of cut anything off. But it would be great to have time for a short sort of Q&A time afterwards. So we're going to aim to finish the call at 6:10 instead of 6 o'clock. Hope that's okay. Our final speaker is Professor Lorraine Whitmarsh, who is an environmental psychologist based at the University of Bath in the Department of Psychology there. And she's director of the UK Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations. In her various roles, she regularly advises the government and other organisations on low carbon behaviour change and climate change communication. And she's the lead author for the IPCC's Working Group 2 Sixth Assessment Report. We're honoured to have you here, Lorraine, and are excited to hear from you tonight. Welcome.
Thanks, Jenny. It's really lovely to be joining you, and feel really humbled to follow such amazing presentations of people that are trying to deliver change and doing such fantastic work. So I don't know if I can add very much, but I definitely agree with what everybody has said so far. I just wanted to make sort of 2 points, really. The first one is a fairly obvious one, I think, to the audience here, but why do we need to engage young people with climate change? Well, we need public engagement generally with climate change because we need profound societal transformation in order to address climate change. Almost all of the measures needed to reach our climate change targets will involve some degree of behaviour change, whether it's buying electric vehicles or installing heat pumps in our homes, changing our diets, our patterns of consumption, to changing how we work and the professional decisions that we make. All of these things need everybody in society to be on board with these transformational changes required. And so we need a public mandate. We need buy-in from people to deliver wide-ranging measures to cut emissions and to protect us from climate change. And why specifically young people? Well, we need to equip the next generation with the skills and knowledge needed to adapt to a changed climate, to cope with the risks and challenges that that new environment brings. But also, really importantly, we need to instill the skills and motivations for those young people to take up opportunities associated with a low carbon transition, new sectors, new professions that are going to be emerging that are in line with a green transition, and enabling young people to see the various benefits of living in more sustainable ways, that there are benefits to health, well-being, to prosperity, to community, that these are actually good things, that these are benefits that they can make use of. And of course, young people are forming identities and values and habits that will last them a lifetime. And so it's much easier to intervene and try to shape and create those sustainable values and habits than try to alter them later on once they become ingrained. How engaged are young people with climate change? That's my second question. Well, the age gap has narrowed. It used to be the case that climate change was very much much more a young person's issue. But we see from polling in the last couple of years that actually the gap between older and younger people has narrowed, and that actually all age categories are really concerned about climate change and want more action to tackle it. But where we do see some differences between younger people and older age groups is that younger people do seem to be more anxious and more frustrated about the lack of climate action. And that may be because they actually don't have as much power or as much involvement in decision making as older age groups. So in one of the largest surveys undertaken with young people recently, colleagues at Bath surveyed 10,000 young people aged between 16 and 25 across 10 countries. And they found that 84% were worried about climate change, and over 50% said they felt sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless, and guilty. And 45% said that their feelings about climate change negatively affected their daily life and functioning, many reporting negative thoughts as well. And in other work that we've just done, we've compared climate anxiety across age groups, and it is a bit higher amongst the under 25s. But crucially, this climate anxiety seems to be linked to a sense that government is not doing enough. So basically, young people in particular, feel more distressed when they feel that their government has betrayed them and that nobody's really taking them seriously and listening and doing enough. And this really highlights that engaging young people needs to be part of wider efforts to tackle climate change, that young people's well-being depends on concerted policy and societal action to reduce climate risks, to show that the issue is being taken seriously and that future generations will have a habitable planet to inherit. And we know that climate messaging that instills fear and paints an apocalyptic future often demotivates, and it can backfire. So we need to give young people and the public as a whole a sense of agency, show people that action is already happening, that people are starting to change their behaviours, that there are positive examples of action being taken, as we've already heard. And we know that effective climate change communication needs to speak to audience values. And this is really key to, I think, what has been said before about moving climate change out of science in the curriculum, so not having it just siloed there, but having it embedded through a number of different subjects, because the more that we can show the links and how it's relevant to decision making and to action, the more likely we are to motivate people to actually want to take that action. And so, for example, this could be as simple as showing that walking and cycling to school isn't only low carbon, it's also healthy. It probably saves money. It can be sociable, lots of other benefits and very tangible ones too. The more we can embed that positive messaging and show that climate change is action is happening, the more I think we can engage people, including young people, and showing that leadership and showing strong leadership in addressing climate risks, and showing that there is a positive future for young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, for your perspective on things there. I feel as though all the different speakers and perspectives that we've had are all completely sort of interlinked together and complement each other. It's been a really brilliant set of speakers and discussion, really. Thank you. I did just post in the chat a little while ago that if anybody had a question, you can post it in the Q&A box. We do only have a very few minutes. And one question has appeared in there, which says, has it been mentioned that there will be an NEU climate fringe meeting at our annual conference in April? And I had forgotten to mention that, so thanks for that, Kate. So this is just to let everybody know that when the NEU has its annual conference in Bournemouth this April, one of the fringe meetings is going to be on climate change. Somebody probably remembers the day and time, which I don't, and if they do, they can post it in the chat for me now. Of course, if you're not going to be in Bournemouth when the NEU annual conference is happening, you might instead be in London for the April Rebellion, which also starts on the 9th of April, because Kate's asked if I'd mention that too. Begins in Hyde Park, I believe, on that day. Okay, so the fringe meeting is the 13th of April at 5:45 in Bournemouth. So anyone that's in the area, whether you're NEU or not, you'd be very welcome to that. Okay, we've got one more question. Any advice on how to approach a DSL who believes that young people's mental health will actually be made worse by talking to them about climate change more? I think he thinks that people like me are frightening and exaggerating. It's an interesting question coming the day after the release of the government's political impartiality guidelines. I'd be interested to hear from some of our speakers what their take is on this. Perhaps we'll start with some of the head teachers. Any advice on this? Would anybody? Yeah, Nick?
I don't, you know, when there is something difficult for children to process, the solution is never to hide it away. The solution is never to shy away from talking about it. The solution is to put it out in the open and ask the right questions and give them a chance to find some solutions. Don't be under any illusion. Children understand that there is a climate crisis and they are having to process it. So we have to find a way to help them to process it.
Totally agree. Graham, would you like to add to that?
I'll extend my analogy that, you know, this boat that's got the holes in it and the water's coming in, you know, you're going to be having to teach the children before you reach that stage, you know, what the procedure is for safely getting out of that situation. You know, we don't shy away from teaching children about fire safety, water safety. So we shouldn't be shying away from teaching them things that they can realistically and helpfully do. I mean, Lorraine was just talking about agency. Nick talked about agency. By giving children that agency, they feel that and it's if you look at the research into eco-anxiety, it shows that actually by giving young people an opportunity to do something about the thing about which they would otherwise feel helpless, then they're in a better position to cope with the stress that would otherwise cause.
Great answers. Totally agree. Thank you for that. I think we've got time for one more question, and there's one here from David. Do you think that the issue of overconsumption generally can be overlooked? We need to do more than just green the present economy. Would anybody, any one of our speakers, like to have a stab at that one? Jennifer?
Yeah, just to say, in the survey I mentioned earlier that we did surveying teachers globally, we looked at a few different topics. One was climate change, another was sustainable consumption and production. And the survey found that this was a topic that teachers felt the least confident about teaching, and it was definitely felt to be less included as well in resources and kind of support for teachers on teaching this topic in relation to climate change. But the survey also looked at human rights and gender equality and tolerance and diversity. So yes, I definitely think so.
Anybody else want to add to that? Lorraine?
Yeah, I think that's interesting, actually. And I think, yes, basically, I do think we have to try to talk to young people and indeed, the general public about the myth of consumption, that consumption makes us happy. I think there is this pervasive assumption that that's the case. And the evidence shows that the contrary is the case, actually, that the more that you consume and the more materialistic that you are, actually, the lower your well-being is. So it is important, I think, to think about the values that we're instilling and trying to engender a sense of what it is that actually makes people happy and the role that consumption plays in that. And it's also about kind of the jobs available after school in terms of the circular economy and the fact that there are going to be opportunities to work in some of those areas as well. So I think there is lots of angles to that, but yes, definitely.
I feel there's another whole Zoom coming out of this one, actually. But Nick, if you just finish us off on that.
So my children have spent the day taking old clothes and recycling them, upcycling them. We got a fashion show at the end of the month with the press coming in as well. And so we are actively upcycling, and the children are engaged in that in a very creative and happy way. So, yeah, absolutely.
It's a very practical way of doing it, isn't it? Particularly with young children. So that's great. Before we all finish and before everybody disappears, there's a couple of things I want to say. The first one is I really want to plug our NEU Climate Change Network, because this is a great way for NEU members to keep in touch with other like-minded people and the links that we have with all these organisations that we're working with. So if you're not already part of that network and you're on this call, the email is NEU Climate Change Network, all as one word, all lowercase, @gmail.com. So that's NEU Climate Change Network @gmail.com. If you just send off an email to that address, you'll get put on all our various mailing lists and you'll get invited to be on our WhatsApp groups and all the rest of it. And we'll keep you in touch with everything that's going on. And you can help be a part of planning these Zoom meetings and everything else that we do. The next meeting of that group, I can't remember the date of it. I think Paul might be able to put that in the chat in a minute. But for the next meeting of our network is going to be focusing on campaigning in the run-up to the next COP. We're going to be talking about amendments to our conference motion, which several districts have already adopted. So we're hoping that's going to go through. And we're also going to be talking about our response to the DFE consultation and about the guidelines on political impartiality, and about taking things into our own hands, as we've been talking about on this Zoom call today. So that's going to be a really good meeting to get involved in, and some of the discussions that we've had here that we haven't had time to really develop, we can develop those discussions further in that meeting. So please join us. We really would welcome new members and would really like to kind of build this movement within our union and beyond. I've already mentioned the conference fringe meeting. The next thing I want to say is thank you very much to Nikki and Anne-Marie, who've been signing throughout the whole of this Zoom meeting, which was only meant to be an hour and we've overrun. Thank you so much for your work in all these meetings. Also, thank you to our backroom staff who supported and organised this meeting today, which is Sarah, Matthew, Emily and Jacqueline. Big thank you to all of you. We couldn't do any of this without you. Thank you so much for all your work. They have recorded this meeting today, and if you join our NEU Climate Change Network, you will be able to get access to the recording of this meeting. As I keep saying at the end of all these meetings, we are the people we've been waiting for. It's my favourite quote. Nobody else is coming to save us. We have to do it ourselves. I think all our speakers have joined together and said that today. There's been lots of mention of everything being holistic, but there's also been lots of mention of bottom-up approaches. And it's bottom-up approaches that we need when the top-down ones go wrong. And that's what's happening. We need to do the bottom-up action together. That's why we've joined with all these great organisations and schools and head teachers and everybody who are doing the right thing, because united, we can make things change, and that's absolutely what needs to happen. Thank you so much to all our speakers. You've been inspirational, and that's why we've overrun, because I didn't want to cut any of you short. It's all really inspiring, the work you're doing. Thank you so much for doing what one of our attendees has just put in the chat, which is you've restored our faith in human nature. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at the next one of these Zooms, which I hope is going to be very soon, and we can continue our discussions further. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.